Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Modern Business Operation. My name is Sagi. I'm the CEO and founder of Tonkean. And today, I have a pleasure to host my friend, Akshay Verma, the COO of SpotDraft. Man,
Great to see you, man.
good to
Thanks
have
for
you.
having me. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, we've known each other for a couple of years now, maybe a little bit longer. You've made incredible move just recently from head of legal operations Coinbase, now the CEO of SpotDraft. Let's start with earlier on, like the background of
Yeah.
how you got here, and then obviously that last move, which I think is very intriguing for people to learn about. But let's start at the beginning.
Yeah. I often describe my career as like this zigging and zagging, and which is really kind of counterproductive to class that I teach for law students around career pathing, where we talk about intentionality and planning and all the all the steps in the plan that you should think about and implement. But like the reality of my career is I fell into a lot of different things. And I wish I could say it was planned or intentional. It really wasn't. Um, but I think one thing that I will really credit myself for is kind of seizing the opportunity when it was in front of me. Like it was an old adage that success is where preparation meets opportunity, or luck is where preparation meets opportunity. I think about my career evolution far more in those terms than I will anything around I plan this or I plan that, other than going to law school and becoming a lawyer, which is something that I wanted to do for a very, very long time. Going back to my teenage years, practicing environmental law, something I wanted to do for a very, very long time. And then, had an existential crisis in early 2012 where I was like, oh God, I don't want to do this anymore. And oh my God, what am I going to do? Uh, I worked my tail off. Like the whole plan was to do this, and I don't like it. It's not just that I don't like it, like it's revolting to me. Like it was like the visceral reaction. It was awful. And so I was very lucky to stumble upon Axiom, a few months after that happened. Got to know them, their team, and that's really what drove me to the business side of the law. Was that first role at Axiom, doing business development and consulting for what then was a pretty, I'd say, mid-stage startup at the time, 50, I think 50-ish, 80-ish million in revenue, had been around for a few years. But even back then, my conversations with clients were very much explaining to them who we were, what we did, how we did it, the model, and all those types of things. Now it's a very standard conversation everywhere, right? We're 12 years past that now. But that really got me into the business side of the law, which then took me to Facebook. It took me to Coinbase to head up their legal operations teams. Saw a lot of um, how technology and legal technology should really have been leveraged internally at those organizations. Um, and all of that, like all of the whatever 25 years that I've been doing this, like it all has set me up to be able to take on this role at SpotDraft as their COO. So that's kind of how it unfolded. And I'm not a person that has a lot of regrets. And I don't think I have any regrets in my career choices or my career moves. Maybe that's the benefit of hindsight. Maybe that's a level of success that I feel like I've attained. So I feel good about the choices that I made. Um, Plenty of anxiety ridden moments along the way too, but it's not fun if you're not having that.
Oh yeah, it's not important enough. You're not having it, right?
Yes.
You
Yeah.
gotta be, and you kind of like started with it. It's seizing the opportunity. You still need to be making the shot. You still need to be pulling the trigger,
Yeah.
and that is, if you ask me, where it's has nothing to do with luck. If I'll, it's not only being able to identify the opportunity, it is going after them. And I think honestly, this is such a um, common topic sometimes. People that a lot of people I end up having in this podcast are people that driving change too. And
Yeah.
I think we can talk more about that, but the 12 years is also very interesting time frame of how a lot of this entire concept of mobilizing, because mobilizing operations, mobilizing businesses into technology, into new, more modern type of methodologies, I think is the peak of it, really. Because if you think about transformation, you know, digital transformation is a phrase of like what, 30 plus years.
Yep.
But it's like it started from someone not writing anymore on a piece of paper and putting it in a spreadsheet,
Yep.
instead of physical spreadsheet, or like instead of physical word processor, a digital word processor. That's like the basic of the most basic of the most. It's like fundamentals. A lot of, I think, where we're seeing now the quote unquote digital transformation in the past decade is a lot more about how we work and how we kind of like leverage some of those innovations. And so, I think it's interesting that you were able to be an end user of it first,
Yeah.
and then you move to kind of like behind the curtain.
Yeah. I think honestly it was. I think it was a big draw for SpotDraft in terms of the experience that I brought to the table, but it was also a huge draw for me because, even at Axiom in the early days, we were developing our own CLM tool, so to speak. Like we were developing our own contracting technology. It was more for kind of review and turning what we call unstructured data, which is a provision, a natural language provision in a contract, and turning it into structured data, which back then was done manually. So with digital tools, but really still done manually, where you read the contract as a PDF, so it's already digitized. You read it as a PDF and you look at the provision that you need to analyze, and you turn it into a one or a zero or a yes or a no or something of that nature, which is not something that the legal profession had really done before. Right? You send a contract to a lawyer for analysis, and you get back a 2-page memo about what the contract can and cannot do under the contract. Right? That's not particularly helpful for the business. That doesn't really help. Is this contract assignable or not? Yes, that's a yes or no question. And I'm oversimplifying the query
Yeah.
here to get more complicated, but that should be a one or a zero, should be a binary, or it should be a yes or a no. And that data should get fed back somewhere so that you could take action on it. And to me, that really kind of encapsulated like the building of the technology. So I've been around in that world for a long time. So bringing all of that to this role, to the company, and to this part of the market was particularly exciting.
What do you think? So if you do need to, some people, and I guess for a good reason, right? It's definitely exciting to see some of the progress in the last year or so. I feel, at least from what I'm seeing in those markets, whether it's legal, whether it's finance, procurement, whether it's HR, IT, some of those areas where we're not as advancing as fast as marketing tech and sales tech and developer tools like the decade before. You kind of like, again, you sort of like we're in the middle of it as a consumer of them too, right? In Facebook and in Coinbase, started as a supplier of it, moved to being a consumer of it, now back into the supplier side of it. Where do you think this is heading? Do you think it's the peak? Do you think this is the beginning? Do you think the middle?
I
Where's the wave? Where are we in the
I'd
wave?
say, yeah, I'd say it's closer to the beginning than any level of peak because our profession, the legal profession, the bar for improvement is so low. It's so low because lawyers have done things manually for 150 plus years. Everything was paper, everything was from scratch. Even when I was practicing law, it's not like we had a process of templates for doing things like discovery responses and things like that. At times, I'd be able to go do another file for another client at my law firm, and from iManage, get a Word copy and then like cut and paste some things that made sense for my discovery responses or drafting, whatever you're drafting. Fine. I was the first very basic AI tool there. So we had those things, but the level of process improvement and automation and the leveraging of these kinds of tools, like, I think that's the reason that legal technology has really proliferated, particularly in the last 5 to 7 years. You've kind of seen it build up, you know, as far back as I'd say even 2003 or four with e-discovery tools. Like that was the first big thing, and then document management. But now you've seen this massive boom in legal technology. It's because everything was done manually in our profession. Whereas, like, you go to other disciplines in coding, software, things of that nature, is like the very nature of doing things was to accelerate and enable through technology. So you had this ethos and this culture in those professions that did not exist in lawyers, right? Lawyers value effort, they value time, they value just hard work. And so why would you try to find efficiency? And the big change in all of that for me and really for our industry happened in 2008, 2009 with the crash, where all of a sudden scarcity in terms of resourcing for companies and therefore legal departments was a real thing. This wasn't like a, oh, I'm hungry, I can't eat what I used to eat. This is like, hey, I'm hungry.
There's no
There's no
food.
food in the cupboard.
Yeah.
What are you going to feed on? And then you get your feed on your own body fat. I'm getting it's an analogy, but it makes a lot of sense. So you have to start figuring stuff out on your own. Your own body has to figure it out.
I think it's under. I don't think people talk about it enough. Like I think there's something about, um, the black swan type of concept, right? Something that
Sure.
comes in and completely like flip the market. And what I find interesting in looking at the last decade, being involved in some of those markets in the last decade. And again, it's kind of obvious when you if you understand the definition of a black swan. But the funny thing to me is that people mismarking things as black swan too. It would be like this is now a big, that's a black swan, that it's actually not. And then
Yeah.
something else is actually what's becoming, the black swan, which is again, it's in the definition of what a black swan is. You're not supposed to recognize it until it's too late, kind of thing.
Got it.
Um, but I feel it myself with AI and ChatGPT a little bit. And I kind of wonder from your perspective too, because you moved, there's something about it that feels like to me, everyone are freaking out on the wrong thing.
Yeah.
And it will actually come from it's not that there's not gonna be, a big event, but I'm not sure it will come from because then it's too obvious. Does that make sense? And
Yeah.
and I feel like legal is exceptionally in that bucket in which it's almost like obvious. If you talk to VCs, if you talk to like, folks like kids that are out of college or whatever and like trying to build stuff with AI, like the first thing they go after is like, oh, let's draft contracts
Yeah.
automatically.
Yeah.
It's like, it started with like, let's write blogs, but that's like, it's too obvious. And then you're like, okay, what is next? Okay, let's draft, contracts. But it's like, that's too obvious. So there's something else. I'm just curious, because you're in
I,
front of it.
I just went to a conference in Amsterdam called Lexpo, and it's a legal technology conference for most of Europe. A lot of European attendees across the region, not just in the Netherlands. And 90% of the speakers and the content was AI, right? Everybody's talking about it. And we've been hearing about it, particularly in our profession. And then when I say AI, I'm talking about generative AI. I like to be very clear, I'm talking about generative AI
Yeah,
since last spring. So spring of 23, when ChatGPT really broke onto the scene, and everybody was like, "Am I going to fundamentally change things? Fundamentally change how we do things?" Like, I do think that's true. I do think it's fundamentally gonna change the way that we go about doing things. But the reality of how that manifests, I think, is not going to be all that different than what we've been thinking about doing for a while. Okay. So the impact of it is going to be significant because there's going to be a lot of dollar figures that are attached to that impact. And those dollar figures have to do with who's in the market. And so what market this creates and how big that market is. It's going to be dollar figures related to how much money the users of this technology will save in OpEx as a result of using it. So those dollar figures will be real and they'll be big. But I'll just use one of our tools as a very clear example, which when you really boil it down, it's a really cool tool. I love it. It's fantastic and it works really well. But is it a black swan? No, I don't think it's a black swan. I think it's really cool. Again, this goes back to my earlier point around like the bar is so low in our profession that, you know, advanced math looks like freaking magic. And that's what this is, math and statistics. That's what these language models are. And so, so our tool, you can take your playbook for contracting, you can take a third-party agreement, you feed it through the tool, and it gives you red line suggestions, and then you can fire that off to the other side. So what would have taken you manually to read through a contract, know your playbook fairly well, and then redline it on Word, let's say that takes you an hour on a basic contract. This takes you 5 to 10 minutes to push it through, validate the output, make your own changes, and then send it off. Okay. That's a 90. Did I do that correctly? Is that 90%? No, it's not 80%.
No, but
Yeah.
no, but yeah, I understand. It's like it
Right.
changes. Yeah,
It changes the way that you view your work. You've fundamentally changed the speed at which you do it. You can do more, you can do other things. That is a massive level of impact. Don't get me wrong. But is it really magical? I don't think so.
yeah, and I think magic by definition is something you just can't explain, or it's a science. It's a science that you can't explain, kind of thing, or you don't understand, or whatever the quote goes. But I agree with you. I think what's interesting as part of it, though, is, and you touched on it, how rapid. I think where it scares people, or for the people that tends to scare versus or excite people, for the people that tend to get excited, is how rapid would it change? Will a technology change the definition of your work, right? So I had a conversation with my GC actually a couple months back, where we were just like having like just a friendly chat, and he asked me about it, like what do I think about some of those things. I told him, look, I don't pay you to review my NDAs. That's like, that is not what I pay you for.
Yeah.
I pay you because I need to call you sometimes and ask like for advice, to honestly, exactly. And to all honestly, sometimes make sure I'm covering all bases, right?
Yeah.
Just make sure that there's another someone that I can share the accountability with. And I don't think people fully understand that, because that, by the way, is very true about writing code too. Because the other place, other than like drafting, contracts, is write code, right? Let's use generative AI to just write code and write code and write code. And some of the demos, at least, and some of the tools are actually pretty good at that point. But the difference is, if there's this issue in the system at 2 a.m., who do I call? I need to call someone. You know what I mean? If there's an urgent customer need, if there's an urgent like security issue, whatever it is, who do I call? Someone needs to be accountable to those things, because at the end of the day, we are all just helping businesses. You help businesses to help businesses that help businesses we are all like just help each other for each other. You know what I mean? It's like, it's all fake. It all goes down. If there's no people, none of this exists, right? We all just help each other do things that help, other people, that then by the end of it will help you. And so the reality of it is, how fast does it force an individual to rethink their role? I think it's exciting, because I think there's too much nonsense in the way things operate.
Yep.
Too much bureaucracy, too much red tape. This is sort of like what my company is really trying to fight. But on the essence of it, it is exciting if you embrace it, right? And this is kind of the interesting thing to me about lawyers, like you said earlier, like changing behavior, and like it is always like almost the lagging group, but it's almost like they're now putting on the spotlight to basically say, what are you going to do?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look, I think, I don't know what percentage it is, but it's a large percentage. By some counts, it's probably like 70, 80% of what in-house lawyers do is not lawyering. It's not lawyering. It doesn't require judgment. It doesn't require relationships. It doesn't require the things that I think we would fundamentally call human. Let's all agree that lawyers are human. Let's all agree on that, right? So it doesn't fundamentally require those things, but it takes up so much time. And that to me is really, when you look at that reality, that I really think that you're right. People fall into two categories: those that are like, "Hey, this is really cool. We could do better now," and those that are they're like, "Oh my gosh, where's my job? This is going to ruin everything." I do, and not to get too philosophical, I actually think that's a choice. I think that's a choice people make. Okay, so, but the reality of it is, from a business perspective, that 80% of work, I mean, let's just say it's 80%, maybe 70, maybe it's 50, whatever the number is, it needs to be done differently. It has to, and that's not a new goal. That's not a new tenet, not a new statement. We've been saying that for at least 20 years, if not longer. Legal operations, to me, at its very core, has that as a mindset. We can do better because we will do this differently. Or if we do this differently, it will be better. And so that's why, to me, like, technology, and Jen McCarran talks about this a lot. And I think I fought this for a little bit when she really started saying it consistently, because, like, nah, it's not true. But I actually think it's true. Legal operations now is fundamentally about technology, which is not to de-emphasize the people and the process. You cannot de-emphasize those things. But now it is fundamentally about technology, and you cannot be a good legal operator without really understanding the role that technology needs to play in your job and in the department and companies that you serve. So, I guess I'm going to change my earlier answer. I think we're very much on the upswing in this. And again, we're nowhere near the peak. I think there's so much cool stuff that's going to happen. It's going to happen with AI. It's going to happen outside of AI. I think I actually think it's going to be for the better. I'm an eternal optimist, so I probably almost always say this anyway. I think it's going to be for the better for everybody involved, because if you take that one person whose large chunk of time is a lawyer, whose large chunk of time is done doing non-lawyer things, much of the non-lawyer things and tasks are actually not fun for them. So if you can take those off their plate, it doesn't mean they have less to do. This is another thing I want to be very clear on. It doesn't mean they have less to do. It means that they can do more strategic work. And the more that I think people start looking at the use of technology from that lens, I think the angst should start to go away, because then it really turns into something you said, well, what other cool strategic work is there? Things we haven't even thought of yet. Like, I think I could go all the way down the chain to law students who become first year lawyers who are doing all of this mundane work right now. Guess what? 5, 10 years from now, they're upskilled. That's progress, right? Kids are taller now than their parents for the most part. Generally speaking, that's the way it works. You look at my family, my gosh, my nephew is 6'3". I've been the tallest guy in my family for years. He is 6'3". He's huge, right? So first year students and first year lawyers are going to be more upskilled. And then that's just going to push more and more cool work up the value chain. And if you could look at technology and legal technology from that lens, how can you not get excited? I really want to ask somebody that. Like, how could you not get excited by that?
Fear, but fear of change. But I
Yeah,
think
sure.
that's the two buckets, right? That's the two buckets. But yeah, I agree. And I think, and I've said it before here too, but change is coming whether you want it or not. Right. So it is a choice. I cannot agree more with that. It is a choice of what you want to do about it. Um, but I think it's a good. I think it's a good. It's a very good point, and I think it's a good. It's a good way to think about it. Uh, maybe just switching off for maybe last kind of question around um, around that sort of career trajectory you had. What is what do you think is very similar, and what is very different than you even mentioned head of legal ops or head of ops organization, big companies. Facebook obviously is massive,
Yeah.
Meta now, but and then Coinbase is pretty big too. Um, how is that different or similar to now, like being a CEO, running a more business oriented unit um, in a smaller company?
Um, in some ways, the job now, and we're 210 people, which would be by far the smallest legal department I've ever worked in as a whole. When I left Facebook, it was 2,000 people in the legal department.
Yeah,
When I joined Coinbase, I think it was around 400 plus people in the legal department, including compliance and things. So that's already much
yeah,
larger than my entire company. Um, but the intensity and the demands of this current role far outweigh anything that I've ever done in the past. So it's been an interesting shift and an interesting dynamic. Um, I have to, I have to have, and again, like I couldn't. It's not like I trained to be a COO. I didn't train to be a COO. It was on my radar, but there's no way that I could be doing this job right now without having gone through the experience of the last 20 years, but especially of the last 6 years at Facebook and at Coinbase. So part of my remit at SpotDraft includes our entire kind of client delivery or customer delivery team. So that includes our implementation team, our integrations team, our legal operations team. They're the ones that build out all of the templates and workflows and do all the testing before we go live with a customer. And it's a team of about 30-ish lawyers in India. So that part of my remit is that. And so I would call that kind of technical skills, right? That I've gained over time. But then there are a lot of other things which I really enjoy, like the people team. I oversee the people team. Okay. Um, legal operations as as a discipline within legal operations, that doesn't really exist. But for me, I was always so interested in learning how to be a good manager, learning how colleagues work better together, learning how teams function better together, and then learning how companies are going to succeed and not do well, and like what does it take. That I worked very closely with the HR teams at both Facebook and at Coinbase. And those were heavily resourced, both with talent and people and with information. And so I learned a lot of those things. And so I really wanted to make sure that I had that here at Coin or at SpotDraft, because we cannot succeed as a company without paying really important attention to our people. So there's kind of the skill sets that I gained over time, just as a core part of my job. And then there were things I never really oversaw as a function, but that I was really interested in. And now being able to oversee those at a small company, that's been a really nice change. It's intense. Like HR is not for the faint-hearted. It's out, but I love it, and having the ability to really kind of further develop my judgment around those issues, but then also test some of my ideas at the company around those things. That's a lot of fun. That's like building, but also kind of testing yourself and growing at the same time.
it's funny. It's like a little bit closing the loop on the body that eats its own fat.
Yeah,
If you hear me out for a second, so you're in a bigger company. There's like multiple people with the same job that are literally trying to do one thing. And the smaller you get, it is almost a cliche, kind of like more fit, more nimble, but it's not because you necessarily want to or it's comfortable. It's the opposite. It's like
the reality.
you just have to.
Yeah.
Um, and I, I personally think that um, it's a very healthy it's a very healthy thing to do. Kind of learn from the fundamentals in a bigger company, but then like jump into a smaller company. It can be a 500 people company, 200 people company, or a 30 people company, but it is essentially, it will put a different spin on what you think you know, and what you think you kind of like. But having that fundamentals is always, every time I'm hiring folks that had both the big company experience and the smaller company experience, they always end up being more successful in their job.
Yeah.
By the way, compared to people that had only one of those, even if they
What
were
are
like
they?
on the
Yeah.
small, yeah,
It gives you a different perspective. There's an aspect of legal operations around scarcity, right? And driving value out of scarcity, which is a reality at smaller companies. Like you can't function with a surplus of anything 'cause you don't have the resources. So I think that sets you up really nicely. And then there's this aspect of just discipline. And big companies are by nature very undisciplined because they have the luxury to be, right? It's like somebody who has billions of dollars, they're probably not looking at their bank account very often because it's no need to. Like, what do you need discipline for? Like, there's a limitless like supply of
yeah,
resources versus somebody who lives paycheck to paycheck, where like every penny has to be counted so that there's food on the table and there's shelter and there's heat. And then hopefully you have a little bit of extra money to do some fun things. And all of those things are really, really important, but two very different approaches to that. One can have discipline, but it's absolutely not required. The other one cannot survive without discipline. And again, this is immigrant, like immigrant story, coming to this country. Like we had nothing. I grew up with scarcity as part of my life. And so I very much enjoy that scarce. I thrive in that. Like I'm the guy who does like fasting and things because I think depriving yourself intentionally of things is a really, really good way to stay strong and to stay disciplined, both mentally and physically. And so I think I bring a lot of that to the table in a situation where there's lack of resources and scarcity is a real thing. I think it's critical.
not to go too much, maybe the discussion, maybe it's a topic for a different discussion, but not to go too personal. You know, it's a big question. And again, we've talked about it in the past on different situations, both being immigrants, but you just mentioned also owning HR and people, operations as part of your current role. It is very hard. And, being a CEO, I see it obviously from the top, where that same feeling because you come with an immigrant, where you come with that mindset. When you start a company, the company is young, it is by definition with that mindset. How do you pass it along to the next generation, right? To your kids, in personal life, to the next round of people coming to a company, because your goal is to succeed. It's the same. That's what's kind of like crazy about it, both in business and in life. Your goal is to succeed in a way that does not require the next round
Yeah.
of people, whether again it's your next generation, or to be in that situation. But inside that the only way to maintain the success is to have that struggle. So that's, again, it's a big topic, but
Dude, it's a great topic. It's something as parents, my wife and I talk about often because our kids are growing up in a luxurious lifestyle. Like they're very
yeah,
privileged. And just reminding them of that on a regular basis is not particularly helpful. But it comes
no,
out, we're acting bratty, obviously, right? Like comes out as parents. Um, and creating an artificial kind of scarcity, I don't think is particularly helpful either.
yeah, it's not. It doesn't genuinely. It doesn't stick.
Yeah. And which is why as companies grow and they become successful, you lose you lose this. So my wife worked at Facebook very early on. It's like 300 people.
Oh wow.
And they said like no revenue. They had funding and then likely no revenue. Right.
Yeah,
So she grew up in that world out of law school. Like that was her reality. And so she saw that startup world. I talked to her about these issues often. And then obviously now with 150 billion in revenue. And so I started there in 2018, very different company, huge, right? By the time like I left, it was like 65,000 employees. Scarcity is not a word that is used at companies like that. So you lose that. And then who do you hire? You don't hire people who understand that or who even value that. So it starts changing the very culture of your
Exactly.
company.
You
And then
see
the
that. You
or
see that on the
downside.
big companies. You see that
Absolutely.
now. It's
Yeah.
not, you don't need to be, you just look at it. It's not the same.
Yeah.
They're not the same.
I think a lot of lawyers struggle with this because scarcity is not a thing in the legal world. And at law firms, scarcity, the only scarcity that really exists is the work that's coming in. That's
Yeah,
really the only scarcity that exists. And unless a client imposes a scarcity on the law firm, the mentality of scarcity does not exist. So who goes in house? Law firm lawyers. In house companies, in house departments are still not hiring out of law school. So they have to unlearn some of that. And the best ones do, but a lot of them don't. And so they go through the ranks, they become GCs and CLOs without really understanding how to work within a scarce framework. And so that's why you have the kind of opportunity, because it's really what it is, particularly for legal technology, you have the kind of opportunity that we do right now and for the foreseeable future to really improve that dynamic. And to me, that's what legal technology is about. That's what legal operations is about. And that's what makes it really, really fun for me.
to finish off, maybe I want to ask you about, I always like to ask an advice you got early in the career. I want to though circle back on our last point for a second because there's a quote from Chris Rock that I learned in the comedian
Yeah.
one of the one's kids where he with Seinfeld they had this thing as a show about comedian in cars getting coffee. I don't know if you saw it.
Uh-huh.
Great
Sure.
show.
Yeah.
So he has is a quote there that I'm still using till this day about this topic where Seinfeld asked him, "What do you do when your kids are acting, like they own the world, and how do you deal with that? Being, telling him like Chris Rock, you're being, successful millionaire. How do you do it?" He said, "Oh, it's easy. Every time they ask if Daddy, are we rich?" His answer was, "I'm rich. You're not rich. I'm rich."
I love that.
So I think there's something there to take with you in, many
Yeah.
ways. It's like, yeah, we are comfortable, but I am comfortable. I work hard to be comfortable. You still
Yeah.
need to prove yourself.
Oh, dude, it's
And
so true. We went on a vacation a year and a half ago to this all-inclusive resort in Mexico, and my younger son, we were going down to eat, and he's like, "Daddy, can I just get anything from the restaurant?" I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "Is it free?" That's the way his brain works. We're
yeah,
not spending over money in the moment to get that food. So in his mind, it's free. I was like, "No, dude." I was like, Nothing is free. How do you think we're here?" He's like, "I don't know." I was like, "Oh, that's probably." He's gonna be great with his money just because that's just the way his brain works. But yeah, I just have to be more intentional about it. My parents didn't have to be intentional really because it
exactly.
was the reality. I have to be far more intentional. And I think that's the same for people in our roles.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, any good advice you've got, through your career that you feel like were impactful, worth paying forward?
Yeah, I think there've been a lot of. I'm been very fortunate to have had some really good mentors and sponsors and managers, people that I have in my kind of smaller circle of trust that I reach out to for things. And I think one of the most important pieces of not just advice, but this is somebody who walked the walk and did a lot of work around it, was just how important and how much intention and attention you need to pay to the people side of the equation. Because, to your point earlier, like we are people helping people help people do things. That's what we are. We're not a bunch of robots who can run independently. We can just not, maybe that's Skynet's down the road somewhere. Maybe, who knows? Maybe we're all becoming obsolete at some point. I don't really worry about those things. But for now, no, absolutely not. This entire planet, all these, they're all run by people. And so you have to pay really important intention and attention to the people side of the equation. I don't think I appreciated that enough early on in my career, and I don't think I can pay enough attention to it now and give it enough kind of resourcing. That's how much that kind of learning lesson had an impact on me.
Cannot agree more. Cannot agree more. Well, man, this was awesome conversation. Thank you so much for sharing everything. If people want to nerd out with you, reach out. Is that
Yeah.
LinkedIn, X? Where can they find you?
LinkedIn is a great place to find me. I post often. I love it when people engage when I post too. It's like it's a fun conversation to have. Um, yeah, would love to connect with folks on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Well, thank you, man. Thank you so much, man. It was
All right.
good to have you.
Thanks for having me. Take care.